Bodybuilding fans, wake up because what you're about to hear will shake the very foundation of the sport you thought you knew. This isn't your ordinary physique update. This isn't your routine bodybuilding news. This is about Chul-soon, the Korean monster who has been written off, laughed at, and underestimated more times than most athletes get chances. And now he's coming like a storm with one purpose: to rewrite the rulebook at the highest level. For years they treated him as a showman first, a performer second, a man whose routines, charisma, and stage flair distracted the crowd from what his body could actually do. But the greatest stories are the ones where the clown becomes the king, and Chul-soon's story reads like a slow-burning ambush. Underneath the theatrical smiles, the perfectly timed flexes, the 8-pack that first made headlines, there's a machine that learned the language of muscles, learned to speak through density and conditioning. And now that language has evolved into a dialect of dominance that will be spoken loudest on the Olympia stage. Imagine a man whose shoulders flare like Corinthian columns, whose chest sits like carved granite, whose waist is cinched so tight that every muscle looks like it was chiseled by a sculptor who'd forgotten mercy. This is a physique that reads old school and modern at once, classic lines married to mammoth density. And that juxtaposition is his advantage because judges see shape and maturity, and fans see art, and rivals see a threat that doesn't fit their mental checklist of who belongs at the top. Yes, he used to dance for applause, put on spectacle to win hearts and followers, but what the world misread as performance was actually practice in the language of presence, timing, angles, control. And when you combine that with the kind of conditioning that makes skin melt over muscle, you get a weapon that humiliates complacency. Let me tell you about the hunger. Chul wasn't born this way. He became it the hard way. An underfed kid who learned that respect follows presence, who turned ridicule into a calendar of sacrifice, who traded convenience for containers and flavor for formula because the scoreboard he cared about wasn't social media. It was symmetry. It was density. It was the mirror at 4 a.m. when nobody was watching and the body said enough. But the ambition said, one more set, one more plate. Years of that ledger added up to something the world thinks is impossible because he lost weight to gain respect. He built mass to rewrite perceptions, and now the man who once pranced on stages with crowd-pleasing routines has forged himself into a competitor whose every decision is about the final line on the scorecard. The transformation wasn't overnight. There were seasons of bulking and of meticulous cutting, of experiments with methods old and new, of testing cardio protocols and rethinking glycogen strategies, of dialing sodium and water like a chemist prepping an experiment. Improvements came in small increments. 2% more muscle here, tighter conditioning there, stacked for years until the margin separated him from the pack. People love the highlight reel. Chul's 8-pack, the poses on the beach, the viral clips. But the secret is the spreadsheet. Macros tracked, meals scheduled, sleep treated like a meeting you cannot miss, recovery measured as religiously as reps. He learned to feed the machine. Lean proteins measured, carbs timed to training windows, fats placed strategically for hormone support. And beyond nutrition, there's programming. Heavy compound days for mass, old-school isolation phases for shape, positional training to carve the insertions and the sweep of muscle bellies, and conditioning circuits built not to burn out the system, but to sharpen the blade that carries the size. This is the calculus that makes a classic physique not only beautiful, but lethal when hung next to modern monsters. And let's talk about the mental pivot, because that is the crucial turning point. The man who once asked for applause began asking for respect, and respect demands results. So he flipped from entertainer to predator, and that change is deeper than switching music or tweaking a routine. It's identity surgery. He teaches his body new tolerances: higher daily volume, sleep deprivation managed and used as fuel, hunger tolerated as discipline, discomfort welcomed as the training partner that never leaves. That's why when Chul walks backstage now, it's not with a wink. It's with the hard gaze of someone who has purchased his confidence with discomfort. The outsiders in the US and Europe have always been comfortable with their assumptions. The showman from Korea, they said. The viral model, they said, not a real threat. But the sport evolves on exceptions and Chul is becoming one. Neither entirely classic nor just a modern sculpt, he's the hybrid that breaks category lines. And at Olympia 2025, that hybrid will be deadly because the stage rewards the man who forces judges to choose between conditioning and charisma, and Chul will force them to choose both, to reconcile size with symmetry, to reconcile presentation with true muscle maturity. Let's break down where the shock will come from. First, his conditioning. Chul's recent cuts have had him looking carved to porcelain, the kind of low body fat that makes veins into topographical maps and separations scream at the lights. Second, his muscle density. He carries mass in places where classic physiques are expected to be softer. His quads and hamstrings plug through the skin with fibers that read like old-school muscle, while his upper back and lats create the illusion of a torso that belongs to a statue. Third, his posing. No longer a gimmick, but a strategic weapon, designed to expose weaknesses in his opponents and to accentuate his strengths. When he times a lat spread or a front double biceps, the room will feel the physics of his lines, and the judges will not be able to look elsewhere. But tactics alone won't dethrone kings. It's the story that sells the upset, and Chul's story is complicated and magnetic. He's been underestimated, mocked, fetishized as a novelty, but every slight has been fuel, and that stew of resentment and ambition is the chemical that creates fight. Those who feed on doubt become dangerous because they carry the intensity of an entire nation's expectations along with personal demons. And when they walk onto an American stage, they bring a cultural narrative that's impossible to ignore. The outsider who refuses to be boxed in, who refuses to accept the script written by others, who will, in one performance, take the narrative and burn it. Expect drama. Expect him to use his showman skills not to distract but to dominate, to make the crowd love him and the judges respect him, to make opponents feel small simply by existing next to him in silhouette. And there's a backstage reality to this ascent. The comeback road hasn't been polite. Setbacks, weight fluctuations, nights of doubt, media noise, critics eager to call his return a circus act. He's survived all of it and learned to turn noise into a metronome that times his work. Where others might crumble under scrutiny, Chul has made scrutiny his training partner, practicing the smile while his muscles burn, practicing control when hunger screams, practicing humility until it becomes confidence. Don't mistake charisma for softness. This man has the spine of an athlete and the patience of a monk. He understands that to win at the highest level, you must be merciless about the small details. Tanning that flatters separations, oil that catches light on the right ridge, choreography that hides a weak hamstring and accentuates a blasting chest. But most of all, he's merciless about the routine of days. Wake, track, train heavy, recover, eat again, show up tomorrow and do it better. Repeat for months and the body rewards the ledger. And the physicality is only half the narrative. The other half is the cultural battlefield. Olympia has long been dominated by Western narratives, and Chul's arrival disrupts the comfortable assumptions of legacy and empire. A win by a meticulously prepared and fiercely determined outsider would not simply be a title, it would be a tectonic shift. A message that excellence can arise anywhere, that the canon of greatness is not the exclusive property of any one region. And that's why the idea of Chul walking away with an Olympia trophy terrifies traditionalists and excites the rest of us who want the sport to grow beyond predictable crowns. Now let's get tactical. What will he do on prep and on stage that makes the crowd gasp? First, expect volume training with microcycles focused on quality. Hypertrophy blocks to pack the muscle bellies, followed by maturation phases where density is coaxed out by slow eccentrics and heavy partials. Second, expect conditioning that's surgical. Strategic carb manipulation layered with targeted refeed windows to keep fullness without blurring striations. Third, expect posing that's been reworked not to entertain but to assassinate. Poses curated to cast shadows on rivals' weak points while highlighting his own best assets. Fourth, expect his mind game. Calm interviews, sudden bursts of charisma, a narrative he will weave in the press that makes every camera a soldier in his campaign, because presentation outside the stage influences perception on it. And let's be blunt, you cannot ignore the comeback factor. An athlete who returns hungrier, smarter, and more mature often performs beyond previous ceilings because experience teaches smarter distribution of energy and smarter peaking strategies. Chul has the experience of headlines and the humility of someone who's lost and rebuilt, and that combination is deadly in high-pressure peaking contexts like Olympia. Still, obstacles remain. The field will be stacked. Athletes who've built reputations for size and conditioning will not give ground easily. The judging is subjective and politics exist. One off night can cost a trophy. But the edge Chul carries is the element of narrative disruption and the practical reality of his physique. He creates contrasts. Size where you expect classic grace, conditioning where you expect soft finishes, and contrasts beg comparison, and comparisons make judges make tough decisions, and tough decisions can flip expectations. There will also be soundbite moments, rival flinch, a whispered underestimation caught on camera, a sudden roar from the crowd when Chul holds a pose and the lights hit him the right way. Those moments matter because sport is partly spectacle, and spectacle writes headlines that nudge judges and fans alike. Beyond Olympia, the ripple effect of Chul's success would be huge. More attention on Asian bodybuilding circuits, a reappraisal of classic meets modern programming, and perhaps a new generation inspired to blend presentation with raw physicality. That's the long game. One man's title can change pipelines, coaching philosophies, and sponsorship interest across continents. And Chul understands that his success can be bigger than himself. It can be a lever for an entire movement. But put aside strategy and speculate instead about the visceral. Picture Chul backstage, shoulders wide, breathing shallow, skin glistening under bulbs. Picture him in the call-outs, chest ablaze, waist razor thin, quads planted like pillars. Picture the crowd shifting when he walks past, the microphone catching murmurs about his conditioning. Picture judges exchanging looks, calculating, forced to weigh old standards against a new reality. This is the kind of theater that builds legends. The greatest part of his arc is that it's believable. He has the visuals, the years of discipline, the public persona that can pivot from charm to steel, and likely the coaching and nutrition support to fine-tune the final product. If he remains healthy and times his peak, the stage will not contain him. It will showcase him, and the results will be irreversible in the narrative of the sport. So for anyone writing him off as a moment or a meme, this is your wake-up call. The man who danced for applause learned to train for trophies. The viral sensation learned to calibrate conditioning into a weapon, and the outsider is now primed to make insiders nervous. Olympia 2025, if he indeed steps up in form, will feel less like a familiar contest and more like an earthquake that rearranges the map, because Chul's presence forces the sport to reconcile what it values and who it crowns. And when history is written, the pages that once excluded such a figure will have to be edited. The moral of this story is not that novelty always wins, but that obsession always improves the odds. Chul's journey from underdog to threat is the textbook for anyone who thinks grit can't close gaps. The path is ugly, repetitive, lonely, and precise. And that's why winners always look a little mad to the spectators. Mad enough to sacrifice, disciplined enough to execute, and cunning enough to turn spectacle into strategy. So if you love drama, study his conditioning, watch his posing, and listen to the subtleties of his interviews, because they are the breadcrumbs of a man who intends to upset the usual order. And if you love sport, buckle up, because a sensational performance from Chul-soon will remind you why bodybuilding is beautiful. It is the art of human will made visible, the calculus of sacrifice measured in muscle and patience, and sometimes, just sometimes, the outsider comes in and takes the crown. And whether he walks away with the trophy or not, the impact will be felt in the judges' notes, the headlines, and the next generation of athletes who will look at his photos and say, if he can do it, so can I. For more such interesting videos, subscribe and like the Muscle Craze channel. See you in the next video. Until then, take care of yourself.